Morning, Dave. How are you?
Good morning.
Oh, how's the day treating you?
Oh, pretty good. Just getting started.
Yeah, it's a good day. Got a lot
Yeah.
done myself, but you said you're just getting started. What do you got planned for the day?
Working on some abstracts for a couple papers for conferences that are coming up.
Ooh, do you care to enlighten me a little bit?
We've got some UN climate conferences coming up, and I'm writing some papers on what to do about all the methane that's being produced.
Oh, ironically, I don't know if you've heard of this group yet, but I work really closely with the group that's establishing Earth Exchange.
Oh, great.
So yeah, we did some announcements yesterday. We were officially got our letter from the UN for the African Arab Council of Integration and Development. We've
Uh-huh.
got 52 countries now that we're essentially endorsed for, which is
Oh,
awesome.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. We've already got three countries that signed on: Kenya, Indonesia, and Brazil.
Hmm.
So it's a small start, right? With everything we're
Yeah,
trying
that's
to
right.
do.
That's awesome.
So why don't you tell me more about what's going on? Because this is really like, I don't mean to jump right into it, but I'm really interested in what you see in this. This is a new thing for me, trying to understand this domain.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's certainly it's a tricky area. I started in the internet industry before the internet went public, so I sat on a lot of standards committees for developing the internet protocols, and built the access concentration technology that allowed us to dial up. And in fact, at one point, my group at Lucent, I was a researcher at Lucent Bell Labs, or a research manager, and we built the original Apple Airport. So the very first commercial Wi-Fi hotspot, because before Steve Jobs asked for one, for when he remember when he came back to Apple and he launched the iMac and they came in the different colors, that was supposed to
Yeah.
be the first computer that did wireless networking. And what he didn't know at the time was wireless networking was all ad hoc networks. There was no such
Mhm.
thing as a wireless modem or hotspot. We didn't even know what to call it yet because we hadn't even created one. And so he called us about 6 months before the launch at Macworld, and he was like, "You guys have to build something for me because Lucent owns all the patents for Wi-Fi." So we we cracked that out in about 6 months. Years after that, I moved into surgical robotics. I've been working with Johns Hopkins for about 10 years, building a surgical robot. Got that cleared by the FDA last year, and then I was approached by the president of the ICCF, which is the International Conservative Climate Foundation. I think that's what it stands for in DC, really big climate lobby group. And they had some technology that they wanted us to take a look at, as well as some potential clients. And so right now we're just talking to Dannon. They own the yogurt company and all of that,
Yeah.
but they have 200,000 dairy cows. And
That's a lot of
some
methane.
of some of that milk goes to Mars, M&M Mars, to make all their chocolate. And so but and each individual dairy cow produces about 160 kilograms of methane a year. I mean, that doesn't include the biodigesters dealing with the urine or anything like that. That's just them burping. And that's a lot of methane. So we were looking at that as a technology because Dannon committed themselves to be something called a B Corp. And so to get that kind of external international certification as a B Corp, they had to literally rewrite their corporate bylaws to include these sustainability goals, which means that at least in the United States, the board members are legally obligated to police that. Otherwise, it's a Sarbanes-Oxley violation because they'd be violating their duties as board members. So they're on the hook, and they are significantly behind. Technology for carbon reduction is very hard to come by. It's still difficult to make, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But you see on Reddit, people will be like, "Oh, it was just something that they said for a while." But it's like, you go to a cement plant and you look at the kiln used for drying cement, right?
Yeah.
It's literally 5 stories tall at a 30-degree angle. And that entire thing is heated 24 hours a day by natural gas. So, sure, if you're building a new cement plant, you could reasonably make that electric, and then it's easier to like counteract the carbon footprint aspects and things like that. But if you've already got a system that's designed around the use of fire, what do you do? It's not it's not like you can retrofit these unless people
No,
really want to see the economy go to hell. You can't just like,
bingo.
snap your fingers and make all these changes. So we'll see changes over time, but what that means is a lot of these commitments are very, very far behind. So if you look at kind of some of the latest research that's out there, MIT, Johns Hopkins University, Manchester University, and a couple others have all been working on not just capturing methane, but actually converting it into another molecule. Capturing methane all by itself is extremely difficult. The molecule is extremely round, and that
Unreactive.
it makes it really difficult. It lights on fire if the concentrations are high enough, but it is actually not a very reactive molecule, and a lot of people don't realize that. And then what do you do with it, right? You're going to capture it, and because it's a gas, now you're going to have to apply energy to keep it under pressure, to keep it chilled. Then you end up using probably more energy than what it was going to cause in terms of problems in the first place. So it's one of these annoying cat and mouse issues. So anyway, there's technologies that are being developed out there that will potentially, by interacting the methane gas with a catalyst, will actually convert it into like acetic acid or methanol or ethanol, which are liquids. And so they'll literally precipitate out of, like, so you'll have like a big gas chamber and you're pulling in air through, zip it through the catalyst, and then you'll literally have it rain one of these liquids. So methanol is the second most used solvent in the world, second only to water.
Okay.
It's used in everything. Pharmaceutical manufacturing. I mean, really, it's one of the easiest Lego blocks to deal with. And it's funny, again, just because of my background on this. I'll like see people on Facebook and they're like, "Oh, drugs, they're just made out of oil because of the big oil company." It's like, no, their oil are large hydrocarbon chains of organic molecules, and the organic molecules your body is made out of are the same thing. There's a reason why it's so easy to make drugs from petroleum distillates, because they're Lego blocks. They're giant chains of hydrocarbons. And that's what all life is based on. So when you look at something like methanol, you've got this extremely easy to use, easy to store, low energy potential for all kinds of industrial uses. We can now turn it into sustainable airline fuel. I mean, there's all kinds of avenues for it. But the trick is building something, right? So we're still working with the basic research, and so probably one of our first goals will be to build kind of a benchtop system at one of the universities that we're going to be partnering with, and then we'll go from there and we'll build a pilot program. Just one of the farms in Dannon's network has 5,000 cows in the barn at one time, which
Wow.
is a staggering number. I mean, I grew up with, my grandpa had a dairy farm, and I think there was 100 cows.
Mhm.
And that seemed like a lot. So just, I mean, imagine, an indoor city with cows. And
Mhm.
it's really crazy. Now, the benefit in my case is that it's sort of enclosed. The cows are more or less free to come and go as they please. Cows like to hang out together, so they go inside. It's easier. It's easier on their feet. There's no stones. Cows, given the chance, cows will most likely go inside. So so there's one open side on the barn, if you even want to call it that. And then the other sides are semi-enclosed. And then the far end from the open end is just this 30-foot tall wall of fans, because there's already so much methane built up in there that it's displacing oxygen. And cows and people will faint if you don't get the air, if you don't continually recycle the air, right? So
Wow.
the great thing for me is that means now I've already got the air delivery system. So now it's just a matter of, how do I attach something to a 30-foot wall, 30-foot tall wall
System.
of fans without I don't want to build up any back pressure, because there's a reason the air is moving through as it is. So I've
Yeah.
got to like minimize the amount of back pressure and then concentrate the methane precipitate that out as to methanol or whatever we end up going with, and then the rest of the air goes out. Now, at some point, we'll probably try to capture the CO2 as well, because you can also convert CO2 to methanol. I mean, there's other things you can do with CO2. So yeah, so it's really interesting technology. And when you look at what's going on out there right now, a lot of this technology is still very bleeding edge, which is, like you've got that mammoth system in Iceland that Climeworks is building. And this is supposed to capture 1 gigaton of CO2 from the air in a single year. So 1 megaton a year. Seems like a lot of CO2. Except right now, the estimates are that we have an excess of about 40 to 80 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere right now. And that's what has led to the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming for the planet.
So just to clarify, you said gigaton and you said megaton. So it's a gigaton factory, but it does a megaton removal per year.
In their case, I'm sorry. Right. In the atmosphere, we have an excess of as much as 80 gigatons of CO2. And the biggest CO2 capture system on the planet that is currently still under construction is planning on doing 1 megaton a year if it works. That's where the technology is today. They're that far behind in making a dent.
Or 80,000 times in excess of a potential solution. The
next version of the Climeworks device is supposed to be 100 megatons a year. Definitely catching up, but it's crazy. And when you look at what the technology requires, like, why is it built in Iceland? Why is it off in the middle of nowhere? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, it can't handle atmospheric pollution. So you don't want to put it in India or New York City or Detroit or something like that, where you've got lots of particulate matter, because it has no pre-filters.
You have very limited places you can put this, and you need infrastructure to run it.
The air intake system is 80 meters long, 60 meters high, and I think 4 meters deep. That's just the fans. It's an array of fans. And they actually had to do math. And there's a document that you can read from the American Academy of Sciences. They actually had to do math on how fast they could run these fans without causing like weird atmospheric depressions. So the fans can only spin at a certain speed. Otherwise, they can literally affect, not a huge effect on the weather, but it would be annoying.
It could impact it.
Yeah. And then, like I said, they can't really deal with any sort of like atmospheric pollutants. So there are no pre-filters at all in the system. It is assuming clean air coming in. And even in the middle of nowhere in Iceland, where they've got infinite geothermal energy, which is another trick that they're trying to deal with, they're pulling birds out of the fans on a daily basis.
I'm so sad, but I get it.
Because if they add any additional pre-filters, they're going to increase the back pressure. They're going to lower the efficiency. They're going to have to increase the fan speed, which means they're going to have to pour more energy out of the ground. It's just this endless cycle. This technology is extremely difficult. There's another proposal for a CO2 device that should do 1 gigaton of CO2 a year. And this is serious. But it sounds like it's a joke.
Okay.
The idea would be to put a giant refrigerator in the Antarctic. So basically all of the little radiator fins, right? And so what you would do is the Antarctic is already pretty cold. And so you make it even colder, and any CO2 that comes in contact with those radiator fins is going to turn into solid and just fall straight down. It'll just freeze from the air, right? And which seems like a cool idea. To build it to do 1 gigaton a year, they need 45% of all aluminum manufactured on the planet Earth in a single year. They need 45% of the planet's manufacturing capacity for aluminum to build one of these devices.
Well, I don't think people really understand. Like, you're like, 45%. I'm like, okay, for one, that by itself is an astronomical thing.
It's
And people
incredible.
don't even understand everything else that goes into that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the engineering, all the manufacturing. It's not
Industry.
easy living or working, let alone outdoors in the Antarctic. So you've got those logistics. And so it's what's ironic about this whole situation is there's almost no venture capital money because the VCs that what you go to Sand Hill in California, what's the first thing out of a VC's mouth? They barely care what the product is. They just want to know, am I going to get 4x within a minimum of 4 years? That's all they care about. That
Yeah,
nothing else
absolutely.
matters, right?
Yeah.
And maybe at some point we will be able to build viable economies if you could actually get useful products out of pulling CO2 and methane out of the air and actually make money off of it. That's your next oil field.
Yeah.
And people, and this is another one of those misconceptions you'll see on Reddit all the time. People will be like, oh my God, they're going to pull the CO2 out of the air and it's going to kill all the trees. No. You pull 80 gigatons
I
of
hope people are not
CO2.
dumb.
You see the comments all the time. I get blasted on Facebook. I've had it on LinkedIn. And
That's
right
offensive.
now, the total atmospheric concentration, I had it written down here somewhere. The total atmospheric concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere right now is 0.04228%, something like that. I think that's the number. And if you pulled 80 gigatons out of the atmosphere, that percentage drops to 0.04178. So as a percentage, it's almost nothing. And yet
It's
that is
negligible.
enough CO2 that it's warming the planet, right? And it's gonna and people don't realize where the real end game is. It's not the CO2 that's warming the planet that's really the problem. All of the permafrost, which covers about 24% of the entire landmass of the northern hemisphere, all of
Mhm.
that permafrost is holding about 250,000, no, 2,500 gigatons of carbon.
People don't understand it's an exponential chain reaction.
Once the permafrost starts melting and dumping oxygen or dumping carbon into the atmosphere, it's just going to accelerate its own effect. The permafrost can
It's a flywheel in a way.
easily heat us by 10 degrees Celsius within a couple of years. It'll
People have
turn,
no idea the implications.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's really, really rough. And so it's wild to work with. This is to finish my earlier point. This is why Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, the Dannons, the Mars family, even the Walton family. This is why they're putting their personal money into these technologies
Mhm.
because, for Bill Gates to put, 20 million into a pilot project is nothing.
Yeah.
And so he's more interested in the results. He doesn't care if there's a return. But the thing is, and this is what 10 years from now, people are going to be pissed off because at some point they're going to figure out how to monetize all of this carbon capture. And who's going to be the next multi-trillionaire? Gates, the Walton family, the Mars family,
Yeah.
right? Because they're the ones who are willing to put dollars down to make the solution happen, whether or not it gets them a return. But it's going to get them a return. It's going to happen at some point. It's not going to be as fast as a VC wants it to return, but it's going to come back. And the amount of money, like I was saying, if you're pulling this CO2 out of the atmosphere, the oil fields in Saudi Arabia are nothing compared to the
Yeah.
amount of CO2 that we can pull from the atmosphere, turn it into methanol, turn it into sustainable aviation fuel, and still have no impact on the total amount of CO2 that's currently in the atmosphere. It would be negligible, and yet you would be able to do this, and it'd be trillions of dollars into the economy. And who's going to make that money? Bezos, Gates, Waltons. It's just
Yeah.
it's kind of weird because you can see the train down the road, and people are going to be pissed off. They're going to be like, "Oh, it's not fair." It's like, well, they're the ones who ponied up to fix it.
Yeah.
It's
This is
weird.
awesome. I love it too because even the Al Mayan family, who's a little bit above the Waltons, they control 6% of the world's oil. They're putting massive amounts of money into this. This is why they
Yep.
started Earth Exchange through one of their investment groups. And it's an opportunity for people to start investing internationally with small amounts in kind of
Nice.
yeah, that's the whole point of it. It's essentially a new type of market they're building out. And this is huge. I've read the book that Elon recommended a long time ago called Merchants of Doubt. And you see all the misinformation campaigns about climate change. And it's the same people that had the misinformation campaigns about cigarette smoking. It's the exact same people.
Yeah.
The data's there.
The articles that Dr. Singer wrote for the New York Times years ago, and as you read in the book, there were literal memos inside of the tobacco companies saying it doesn't matter that Dr. Singer is completely unqualified to have an opinion on any of these issues. He was a Manhattan Project physicist. And yet he's writing these articles saying, oh, this research about tobacco and cancer is nonsense. And because he had a PhD at the end of his name, people took it, oh, well, it got published in New York Times and he's a doctor. And it was taken as gospel. The damage that he did, and for money. I mean, he's, him, Andrew Wakefield, I think, is another one that's done irreparable harm to our culture. He stood to make $4 billion off of that alternative vaccine for MMR. And that's why he falsified the studies that he was eventually found guilty of. And now here he is, this anti-vax champion. It's like he was making his own vaccine. he was going to get $4 billion in royalties. And here he is, the champion of the anti-vaxxer movement. It's just so much of this it's really shameful.
It is. There's so much misinformation out there. One thing I try to always tell people, it's like, having worked with people behind the scenes, the higher ups, it's like, you have no clue. The media does not tell you at all what's really happening. If you think, oh, this person did this and they're being blamed, it's like, what's really going on?
Mm-hmm. It's really funny. Years ago, I was at the JP Morgan MedTech event in San Francisco. Every January, there's this huge JP Morgan analyst event for MedTech. And I used to get in for 8 years. I was on the invite list. One of the years, the lunchtime speakers were James Carville and Karl Rove, right? The ultimate odd couple sitting on stage at the same time. And they're talking back and forth. Obviously, they've got disagreements on certain political issues. But the one thing that they were absolute in lockstep agreement on was they said, if you think you understand what is going on in DC and you don't actually work inside the Beltway, you have no idea how politics actually work, because we're presented a view of it from the media and through the PR teams and through the public speeches and all that kind of stuff. And it is complete misrepresentation of how DC politics actually work. And then, of course, the whole thing broke when the Tea Party took over and Grover Norquist came in, because before that, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were best friends. Ronald Reagan spoke at Tip O'Neill's funeral. I mean, they were incredibly close, and yet they couldn't have been further apart on the political spectrum. But when they needed to get something done for the people, they came together. I was at the Capitol Street Grill one time, and seated next to me was John McCain and Teddy Kennedy, just having lunch. Occasionally, like, you're a fucking idiot. And like, yeah, every once in a while they'd have something like that. And then they'd be laughing. No, I'm going to get this, man. And they're talking stuff out and they're talking stuff through. And now, you talk to somebody on the other side of the aisle and you're a traitor. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. But that's how the world is supposed to work. That's the whole point of like the original Roman Senate that we were based on. Yeah, you make these big grandiose speeches in front of the crowds, making it look like you're the only one who knows the solution, but you work with the other people, you work with the other representatives. And so, yeah, we've got the world has a lot of growing up to do. A lot of the internet was just kind of thrust in our faces. We're not prepared to deal with, social media. We see every murder in real time and go, oh my gosh, the world's so much worse off. And it's not. In the 1800s, in the 1800s, they used to literally chain Catholic churches shut, the doors shut during mass, and set them on fire. Yeah. It was not just once, but this is the kind of stuff that used to literally happen over and over and over. And these are the US murder rate is down, all this kind of stuff. And yet, because we see it in real time, any one of those events just gets amplified for us. And I, I wish we could get that kind of word out when it comes to these kinds of environmental issues, because methane and CO2, you don't see them, but hey, down south, they're seeing the effects right now. That's for sure.
You touch on so many important things, and we have a highly uneducated community. I would say uninformed, and the social media is creating all these echo chambers, and it's not intentional. A lot of people think it's intentional. We're like, no, it's how the algorithms work.
It just works.
AI is going to make it even more. We can't even go there. I use AI all the time, and I'm like, uh-oh. But I want to ask you directly, do you mind if I turn this conversation into a podcast? Because you touch on so many important topics.
Yeah, sure. That's great.
Okay. I don't know if you feel presentable or not, but do you mind if I made shorts of this to read? Thank you. So I don't know how much time you have, but you're informing me a lot. Can you kind of add to what a B Corp is? Because I don't think a lot of people even know what that means.
Oh, okay. So a B Corp, I'm not sure if it's a real legal entity or not, but it definitely is something that you see a lot of. But definitely global companies are making moves into whatever this is. There's a organization called B Labs, and they will certify a B Corp, or they'll certify a company as being a B Corp. And effectively, what being a B Corp means is you're now a company that has a publicly stated goal, right? In general, a C corporation, which is the most common business entity in the United States, is usually just what's your stated goal is to maximize shareholder value by making as much money as you can, right? And that's just the way it is. With a B Corp, you now have more. You're still a for-profit company, but you now have a publicly stated set of missions and goals, very much like a nonprofit organization. And so there are companies out there that have literally written sustainability goals and carbon reduction goals, and even things like diversity and inclusiveness and things like that. They're literally writing those things into their corporate bylaws, which means that now that charter, which is filed with whatever state they're incorporated in, is the governing principles for the board of directors for that company. At this point, they are legally obligated to police and ensure the forward movement of whatever those goals are. So if you take a B corporation and they've stated a goal that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, the board of directors are now obligated to ensure that goal because it's been written into their corporate bylaws. And to take it now, you get certification from B Labs. From what I've looked at, I have not gone through the process, but I've talked to some consultants and I've looked at their website online, and it's complicated. There's a lot of work. This is not some little go to a weekend seminar and get a certificate and suddenly you're a B Corp. You're probably, for an established company. In fact, there's a coffee shop, and if you've never been there, go, called Devotion Coffee in New York City.
Okay.
The coffee beans are literally days old. Days old. They're picked in Colombia, put on a FedEx, and they're in New York City and roasting within a span of less than a week. The coffee is the best thing you've ever tasted. It's amazing. And that company's been around for about 10 years. And just recently, they went and got their B Corp status. And it was a heck of a lot of work. I mean, just really intense. But it's something that you can then promote, right? You can now say, hey, our sustainability goals are now etched in stone, right? It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And B Labs will renew your certification every 3 years. And now the flip side is, and again, like answering to some people who are maybe a little bit more cynical and say, it's just all talk anyway. Well, at this point, if you're going to try to back out of those sustainability goals and re-edit your corporate bylaws to take out those sustainability goals, and you're going to tell B Labs that you're not going to seek certification anymore, the word's going to get out. It's going to look really bad for you. And if you
Yeah.
just spent, how many millions of dollars on PR initiatives to tell everybody all of the work that you were doing for sustainability, and now all of that's out the window, it's probably going to have a hugely negative impact on you. So, definitely I would say as a B Corp, it's, it would not be something that I would recommend anybody do officially with a brand new company. It's a lot of work. Have those goals. You can still already have the sustainability goals and things like that. And of course you could write them into your bylaws the day you incorporate if you wanted to, but to actually seek that third party certification for a B Corp is pretty, it's a pretty heavy lift. So I would most likely wait a few years before doing that, get your revenue up, become a sustainable company, and then get a chief sustainability officer, in your C-suite, and really put some teeth into those commitments.
Yeah.
So B Corp is a really interesting thing. It was new to me. I had never heard of one until only about a month ago.
What do you feel like? So I've been looking into this, trying to understand carbon credits and understand the direction of the different regulatory agencies. The European Union's moving that way. I don't know all the implications, but it's implying that they are going to establish that the industries have a zero footprint, and the UN's pushing it. Mm-hmm. But what is the current state of these regulations in countries, like overall, excluding the US? I don't think the US is a good example.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the European Union, those are basically mandatory. Now, I don't think you can build a business that sustains itself based on the carbon credits. It's okay revenue, but when you're looking at, somebody like Climeworks, who is probably still spending at least $500 a metric ton, or no, $500 per ton, not metric ton, per ton, to extract CO2 from the air. I believe that's the number I read. The amount of money that the carbon credits are going to get you is going to barely make up for that, right? Yeah. So it's fine. It's still, I think, a good incentive. Some people would argue that it just hides the problem, because if you then, you're some big oil company or whatever, and you go out and you buy carbon credits from somebody who's got a negative carbon footprint, well, that just means that you're not going to be incentivized to fix the problem. No, it just means you're buying yourself time.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, I think, is a practical one. The cement plant example, I think, is just the most obvious one there. The kiln for a cement plant to dry out the cement, it's a massive, massive structure. And most of them are currently based on burning natural gas. To convert that to electricity, you basically tear it down. It doesn't even, I can't even, I mean, I've been doing, product development like this for an awfully long time, and I can't even think of a practical way to convert like a gas system to, it'd be like having a gas stove in your house and going, I just want to convert it to electric. No, you buy an electric stove, you switch it out, right? But if you've got, but these kilns are like 4 or 5 stories long, and then they're tilted on their side. They're huge. And so the idea of just, converting it or tearing it down, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But these things age out eventually. None of this equipment lasts forever. So if the next cement plant that you build is electric and you phase out the gas one, that's a reasonable solution. And I think people should accept that as a reasonable solution. And the carbon credits buy you time to make that possible. Because I don't know if you've ever worked on any major construction project, but nothing ever comes in on deadline. So even if you thought you were going to bring up your electric kiln, in the next 5 years, it's probably going to end up being 10 years. It's just the way it is. And it's tough. These are massive, massive projects. And so it's a difficult thing. And so I think the carbon credits are good. They provide a really good incentive. The United States is chaos. It's all voluntary. California offers the best credits right now. Hydrogen is the same thing. If you try to buy hydrogen throughout most of the US, the prices are it's not even worth making the stuff.
Yeah.
in California, it's propped up, so it's kind of worth it there. And there are some really cool technologies for taking, for example, just gas, pipeline quality methane. So you could be venting it out of a fracking well or whatever. Let's not go into whether or not fracking is good, but they're there. It's there.
They're there.
And while you're fracking, there is methane coming out. And so you could take that methane, put it into a reactor, and actually get hydrogen and carbon black.
Okay.
And I've seen some companies that they're like, we don't even care about the hydrogen. I mean, they make some money off the hydrogen, but they've developed techniques to collect carbon black that is of such high grade that you would be selling it directly into graphene manufacturers and other high-end uses of carbon black. So not just let's make more tires, but like really, really high-end next generation technology applications for carbon. So, and that's all from the methane that if you weren't going to use it, the fracking was already spitting it up into the air. So having a useful literal pipeline for the methane is a really great approach. So there's a lot of technologies on the end of the pipe, so to speak, and there are incentives. I mean, even in the United States, it is possible to build a business. There is demand out there. And so the technology is possible. You just got to really watch your pennies when you're building up the company, because it's gonna take a while. You're gonna have to scale it up. I mean, when you think about, some of these major industries, and you really look at their balance sheets, sometimes their profit margins aren't that great.
Yeah.
But if you're making billions and billions of pennies, that's a lot of pennies.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Yes.
And so there's a certain point where your scale allows you to internally absorb bad margins and things like that, because the amount of money that you're spitting out the other end is so massive. So it can work out. But when you're a small company, you've really got to watch it. So, any of the lessons that you want to, go out and find books from, the .com days, and just remember, just even if you get venture capital money, don't go start buying, glass and chrome office space and hand carved mahogany desks and all of the stuff that really was just beyond excessive during the .com boom. Had they saved those pennies, they probably would have been able to weather the storms as they were trying to figure out what their economic models for their companies really look like. They'd already blown too much money on foosball tables and just other, not that it's bad to have a little bit of recreation in your office, but it was crazy, right? It was just crazy. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of potential for green tech companies moving forward in the future, but you need to be smart when you're small. And even if you pull in a major investment, you need to think about what your valuation looks like. And so let's take a quick detour on valuation land.
This is important. I actually wanted to go here.
you bring in, let's just do, easy math. You bring in $10 million on $100 million pre-money valuation. That next $10 million you bring in, your valuation had better be bigger. You have to be able to, whatever valuation you accepted for that early money in, you've got to be able to continue to grow that. And I've seen way too many companies just crash and burn because they took these crazy valuations and they got burned. And then they were still trying to figure out, how's this company going to work? How's it going to work? And so when they needed to bring in the next round of money, they couldn't support that $100 million valuation. So they had to take the next round of money in like at an 80 or a 70 or a 50. And a down round will kill you. You will get crushed. Yeah. All of the founders, you'll end up with, fractions of 1% of ownership of the company that you started. I mean, you'll just get obliterated. And sorry, but it's your own fault. You get greedy, you pull in too much money on bad valuations too early on. You've just got to hold these things down. And I'm already seeing some green tech companies out there where I'm just like, I saw one yesterday, $650 million valuation on a Series A. And I'm like, no, that's not possible. I don't care what your TAM is. It doesn't make any difference to me. there's no way you can sustain that. That's never going to
Yeah,
happen. And
absolutely.
and I see that as being sad because it's the employees and even the founders. I mean, I've been a founder for multiple companies, and I go without paychecks. I go through some pretty rough roads early on to build a company that ultimately builds and creates jobs over time. But
Yeah,
I do take lumps in the beginning, and that's what a
absolutely.
founder does. And to
Yep.
then get crushed to less than 1% of ownership when you started out with maybe 40 is really, really discouraging because it's still your baby. It's
Yeah.
basically somebody stole your baby, and that's not cool. So you got to be smart when you start these companies up. And then, while we're on the subject, I would say,
Please.
find other folks. Everybody,
Yeah.
nobody. I actually got a LinkedIn message from my first med tech company was actually building a navigated bone saw for doing knee implants. And the CTO from a potentially competing company reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, Dave, remember we were kind of frenemies?" And I'm like, "Dude, enemy was never in there. You had cool technology. We had cool technology. It went down the road." I said, "I'm nothing but happy to see a message from you." And so we just got on the phone and just started gabbing away out to what we were working on now. And there's a lot of cool technology out there. And there's a lot of cool technology that might be trying to work on the same solution that you are, but it's a big market. Green tech,
Yeah.
it's a big planet. It's a big planet. And I don't care what the TAM is, you're never going to get 100% market in any market. So, great. That's a great metric to have. It's a great basis for your pie chart. But the reality is, you're going to be building your business on a planet with 8 billion other people. And there's plenty of other CEOs out there or VPs or directors or whatever that are working on very similar technologies as you. You can have conversations with them without breaking your NDAs, without, crossing the line for, certain kinds of corporate responsibility. I'm not suggesting anybody not do that, but you can talk to other folks. You can find other mentors. You can find people that are at least in adjacent industries and talk to them. Hey, what would you do here? How would you solve this problem, right? And that's important. Have a network of folks you chat with. One of the greatest things about well, actually, I just was at New York Climate Week 2 weeks ago, and
That
on
was
the
our
way,
group, actually.
oh, cool. On the way back, I was sitting beside one of the speakers from he was one of the main stage speakers from Climate Week. And we just hit it off, and we talked all the way back to Baltimore from New York City. And then he continued on to DC, and we've been chatting on the phone and shooting email. And I've already been like asking him stuff. I'm like, he's definitely in an adjacent industry, but the amount that he understands about methane and energy production and different government subsidies is just way, way beyond me. And so I just been asking him, and he's more than happy. And then he asks me stuff that's clearly in my field of nerdiness. And we're just having conversations. And
Yeah.
you can't beat that.
No.
I don't care what your title is. Don't do this stuff alone. Build a network.
No.
Use a network.
That's why I honestly do what I do. I talk to people, and it's not that I want anything. It is honestly, I get everything out of it just by talking to you. I learn so much. I'm like, well, there's my value trade. What can I offer though?
Yeah.
This thing right here that you're talking about, I don't think a lot of people understand how, for instance, pivoting slightly but directly related, how a carbon credit even works. And it's industry based or it's land based, right?
Yeah. And I'm still learning them myself. Carbon credits, I guess, from the most simple aspect, are as you reduce your carbon footprint, you're given subsidy money for that effort.
Yeah.
And so, and the presumption there is it requires work to be carbon neutral or even to reduce your carbon footprint. And
Yeah.
so that effort is being rewarded with these carbon credits. Now, there are some companies that are lucky enough that just early on, they're nailing close to carbon neutral right off the bat because they had the advantage of selecting the infrastructure with that goal in mind, right?
Yeah.
So you've got companies that very, very early on are just doing great on the carbon neutral, which means they're getting more credits than they actually need. So there's actually an open exchange for selling your excess carbon credit, which is really cool. And so the way that works is you take somebody like, well, you take all these data centers that are running these big AI instances. We thought Bitcoin was bad.
Yeah.
AI is
close.
yeah. AI, the carbon footprint potential for AI is bananas. And so as these companies are trying to, one, get their technology, that's their thing, right? They're not energy companies, they're technology companies. They're trying to get the technology going because that's where their money's going to come from. They're going to potentially use that revenue to then expand their renewable energy inputs so that they can fix their carbon credits that way, right? But if they spend all of their money on power first, they're going to be bankrupt before they get to deliver their product. And this is the paradox, and this happens in every industry. It's a big problem. I think it's really amplified in AI because those things are just hungry monsters.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll only be a metaphor. And
Yes.
but it's just you've got to have the technology. And so when you look at, like, I can't remember who it is that's trying to bring up 3 Mile Island again, to use that as a power source. To me, I'm all for that. I actually grew up pretty close to 3 Mile Island. I'm actually extremely aware of what happened there. I'm actually not concerned about 3 Mile Island.
Neither am I. My background's in physics.
Yeah, it was a training problem, and it was a sensor. It was a poorly made sensor, which anything made in the United States around that era had really bad quality control. That's why Deming became a household name, although he had to get kicked out of the US, go to Japan, teach them how to kick our butts in quality, and then came back to the US, and now everything's quality control and quality systems and all of that. But that process was a hard one for the United States, because there was a time when we built things and the standardization of our quality, forget Six Sigma, we were lucky to get 1.9, for US parts. And so, that's a past issue. So to go in and reboot 3 Mile Island with updated, control panels and reinstall sensors and things like that, I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. Now that's going to provide a pretty decent amount of power and safe, clean energy. I'm okay with. I think it's a little ironic that Texas is on track to become the largest single state with renewable energy, even compared to California. And they're spending Biden infrastructure money to do that. Tons of jobs, tons of maintenance, clean energy. It's great. And so those problems will be solved over time, but there's a lot of folks that have to catch up, right?
Yeah.
And so the carbon credits help kind of create a little bit of incentive. Again, I don't think economically you can build a company that lives off of carbon credits.
No.
We saw that. In fact, there was a carbon capture company in Oregon, or it was either Oregon or it was the very, 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 very tip of Northern California. There's a lot of California after San Francisco. And so it was right up around there. And they were doing like driftwood, they would harvest driftwood from the coastline, and they would set it up in such a way that it was actually pulling in massive amounts of CO2. They were doing some stuff with algae, really, really cool tech, but they were trying to live entirely off of carbon credits. And I think they had something like 150 employees, and they were going, and
wow.
they were kind of going. And then those numbers changed, and they don't have to, if you're dealing with a lot of pennies, like I said before, you can make a lot of money if all you're making money is pennies, if you're making billions of pennies. But if your economics shift in the wrong direction and now you're losing billions of pennies instead of making billions of pennies, you're in pretty bad shape too. And those guys apparently just got caught flat-footed, and they were shut down apparently within 1 or 2 months. They're just gone.
Yeah.
Just poof.
I want people to understand too, this isn't just about companies though. We also have these developing nations that are resource rich, and we can scan that land and see what its effective carbon footprint is. And then they can get credits for a developing nation that helps us not get into the same situation. And they have a monetary incentive. So it's not like just be good. Here's some money, be good.
Yeah. And that's awesome too. And I think the more we treat that, I mean, this is a global problem, obviously.
Yeah.
And so the more we create incentives that really create that environment where cooperation is a good thing, I think that is one of those, true win-win scenarios where everybody's going to benefit, everybody comes out ahead. So it's pretty cool to see. Methane is another one. I mean, that's kind of the problem that I'm kind of focused on right now.
Yeah.
And that effect on carbon is also a really big one. It's insidious.
Yes.
It's one of those ones that the numbers are really confusing. What is it? The global warming potential, GWP, the GWP 100 for methane is 28 times greater than CO2. But here's the thing. Is that really the right way to compare methane to CO2? Because methane has a atmospheric half-life of about 12 to 14 years. So instead, there's an alternative GWP measure, which measures the global warming potential of different greenhouse gases on a 28-year cycle. And when you do that, instead of 28x, now methane is 86 times more potent as a greenhouse gas compared to CO2. So now the problem's even greater. And then what happens when atmospheric methane breaks down? Because it does break down much, much faster than CO2 does. When it breaks down, it becomes low ground ozone. So it becomes a smog producer. So now we've got an acidic, highly oxidative gas that's burning the leaves of trees, which is going to make them less efficient at absorbing CO2. So there's this really weird cascading problem. And then look up nitrous oxide sometime and see how that compares in the GWP scales, because that number is super scary. So nitrous oxide is as a greenhouse gas is phenomenally potent. And you've got a kind of weird double whammy there, because a lot of so this is another one where I've been talking to some folks in the country of India. They still do regular field burning. Those are big fields, 1.8 billion people, a lot of mouths to feed. And so when they burn off those fields, the soot that is put into the air, the NOx and SOx, the output is massive. And so it's nitrous oxide as well as nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide is highly reactive. It burns your lungs. It's what gives smog that's reddish color. But you've also got nitrous oxide, so N2O as opposed to NO2. And nitrous oxide is extremely stable as a molecule. It doesn't like to fall apart. And as a greenhouse gas, spoiler alert, it's something like 800 times more potent on either the GWP 28 or the GWP 100 scales. 800 times more potent. And so now, if I'm India, what am I going to do? I can't just because the United Nations says, stop burning your fields. It's not that simple. It's not that simple.
No.
So we need agricultural solutions. At Climb Week, I was there Tuesday for the methane track.
Yeah.
And some of the talk, I'll be honest, I'm just going to throw this out there. Some of the talks were a little frustrating.
Go on.
Almost every presenter for the methane track started off with the first 3 or 4 slides. Here's the problem. We need solutions. And then it was like, to be continued. I'm like, seriously? Nobody has a solution? Nobody has anything? and they talked about a lot of failures. And so it wasn't just the Climb Week. It wasn't the fault of Climb Week. It was a fault of the current
nature of it.
situation where all that you really can talk about is how bad the problem is. But when it comes to, okay, well, who's got something to, who's actually pouring money into solving this problem? And you had one of the representatives from the Bezos fund, and she literally said, well, we're looking for, we want to make investments, right? Not,
Yeah.
I've already put this much money into this guy. This is what their technology is. Here's their slide. Keep an eye out for these guys. It was, I'm looking. And so, and one of the examples that came up was rice cultivation. Rice is the single highest contributor to methane output of any staple grain grown. And the reason for that is when you flood the rice paddies, you create a anaerobic environment that promotes methane production.
SRBs.
Yeah. So there is a alternative farming method that was proposed that did not involve flooding of the fields. And when a group of farmers tried to do it, not flooding the fields, it turns out, caused every invasive pest, insect from like, I don't know, 100-mile radius just descended on that rice. And so they ended up having to spray the rice with pesticides just to save the crops. The crops ended up getting tested, and they were so internally, systemically saturated with pesticides that they had to throw the crops out. They were useless. So, okay, now what's your incentive for not flooding the fields? Oh, I'm sorry. You know, your families get to eat. you get to survive another year as a farmer, the most thankless position, which is, it's sad how, undervalued farmers are. And so it's like, oh, hey, by the way, shame on you for all that methane, but we have no good solutions for you, because the only solution that we've proposed to you required so much pesticide input as an alternative that you had to throw out your crops anyway. And when I heard that one, I had my head in my hands, because I'm just like, this is where we're at. This is where we're at for solving methane. This is a disaster.
Yeah.
And so, CO2, it's out there, and it's not a problem that I'm personally working on, but I'm just looking at like the interactions between all these different molecules. And every once in a while I sit down and I'm not a physicist by training, but I can wade through the math at times. And so
you can for sure.
I've tried to work through some of the math of what would removing, what's the gigajoule input required based on current technology to remove 80 gigatons of CO2 from the air. And I'm just like, the planet doesn't make that much electricity. We don't have the power generation capacity to do this, at least in 1 year, right? So it's just, you look at these problems and you're like everything, it all comes down to thermodynamics, right?
Yeah.
Removing CO2, removing methane from the air, it's worse than the uncracking an egg problem. You have an egg that you cracked on the counter, you ground it down in with your hand. you made sure the membrane and the yolk are all just completely decimated and mixed in with that now powdered shell. And then you're like, well, can we just make an egg again? That's what we're trying to do. It's just, it's phenomenal. And it's really, I think, I don't want to turn people into doomsdayers, right? But I would love to see more people understand just how important it is that we solve this problem. And just from a basic economic standpoint, look, we've got to generate energy. We have to have jobs to install the equipment. So one way or another, kumbaya, let's all just be socialists or whatever. We got to pay for it somehow, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your economic system looks like. None of that is relevant. Somehow you have to take resources here and apply them here. And that includes raw materials, that includes energy production, that includes human capital, robots. I don't care who's doing it. Somehow the resources have to be allocated to solve this problem. And what that ultimately means is you then need to find reasonable ways to make money from those efforts so that you can have a circular economy, so that you can actually make solving the problem part of the global economy. And if you can do that, then it becomes much easier to solve these problems. If all you do is just say, well, I'm going to, shit talk Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and at the same time, I'm going to hope they put all of their money into these technologies out of their kindness of their heart. That's that's not a sustainable approach to
No.
solving any of this, right? We need more than just philanthropic billionaires
Yes.
to get behind these problems. We need everybody. There's a YouTube channel. My notes handy. There's a YouTube channel that is devoted to, it's called Air Miners. So if you go to airminers.com, it's actually an 8-week self-guided course through understanding climate change. And there are people that are involved in this course that are actually building rooftop carbon capture devices. Now, are they capturing any reasonable amount of CO2? Not really, but they're understanding the challenges that go into building a device like this. And so they're building an appreciation of what it takes to manage this kind of technology on a larger scale. I think that's super, super cool. So even if all you do is go to Air Miners and watch the videos and read some of the articles, I think you get a huge value out of that. But, anybody who wants to send me pictures of their homegrown CO2 capture system, you can have all of the eyeballs that go to my LinkedIn for sure. But because I think it's great. I think it's great technology. And I think more people need public recognition for just even trying to learn and grapple with this kind of technology.
I think the whole community at large in the world doesn't understand the amount of work that goes into research and development. It is a massive, massive investment. And a lot of times people are just looking at the immediacy. And this isn't new. In tribes, for instance, unless things were relatively safe, you didn't see any new developments. Take Isaac Newton. He had the ability to sit there for a summer during the plague, to look at the trees, to ponder, to think, to see things. If you're not in a good, safe state, you can't be creative. And if you don't have the funding, you can't do it either.
That's right. It's we're in such a rapid move, death scroll. We go between our jobs and death scrolling and what's for dinner and then collapse in bed exhausted. And when's the last time, the average person got to sit down and go, I just want to read something on purpose.
Yes.
Even if it's just for the sake of just kind of personal catharsis and just chilling the hell out or learning to read. I mean, here's my stack of bibliography cards. It's about half an inch thick for the journal articles that I've read in the past week and a half, just going through this. But I just, very deliberate. I'm trying to really focus on a specific solution. And I've got, I work from home. So I save a couple of hours of commuting time a day. I get time to read. I get time to spend time with my family. Those are things that a lot of people don't have the luxury to do. But sometimes I think it's just because we've become so distracted by the defaults in our lives. It's way too easy to grab Instagram or TikTok or Facebook and just, death scroll our brains out. And it becoming conscious of that and just instead spending 10 minutes of just reading something that's for your good, for your education, for your betterment. 10 minutes a day, even that, oh my gosh, that adds up so much. And the more people that can sit down and really think about, maybe you can't solve this from a physics standpoint, but maybe you can sit down and go, how do I reduce the amount of garbage that I produce from my home every week? I live in Baltimore. We still burn our trash. Not the greatest solution in the world, but I'm conscious of that. I think about that. batteries. I have a gallon milk jug with a little hole cut out, and so all my little batteries go into there. I'm trying to convert over to rechargeables, but what I'm very conscious of is I don't want to be throwing out batteries into the city trash and then know that they're going to go to an incinerator. That doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Mercury, lithium, all those sorts of things, right? And so think about those kinds of things, because the less that we're putting into the atmosphere, the less this becomes a problem. I mean, it still is a problem. We got to solve it. But, if we can do, even as individuals, and yes, I agree, the big corporations need to do their part too. But if all 8 billion of us just did one little tiny thing, collectively, we can make a difference. And we have to think that way. Yes, we have to hold some of those big corporations that we have now found knew about some of these problems and just filled while the planet burns. They need to be held accountable and they need to be pushed to make changes. Yes, absolutely. But yes, we 8 billion people on the planet also should try to make a little difference here and there. Whatever we're doing today, we could probably find something that we can improve, and that improvement can make a difference. And I'm all for that.
I think that's a really good place to put this and to wrap this up, because
sure,
you can make a difference. It just requires taking action, being conscious. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was very enlightening, and I will send that newsletter over to you once that's written up, just so you can review it before I publish that. Okay.
Awesome. Glad to help any way I can.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. This has been very enlightening.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Okay. See you later. Bye.